The New York City chapter of the Historical Novel Society is pleased to present this recording from May 17, 2022, for readers and writers. Barbara Quick, author of What Disappears, Gavin Larsen, author of the memoir Being a Ballerina, and Clara Peterson, host of the Deux podcast, discuss Capturing the Ephemeral, bringing Sergei Diaghilev's Ballet Russes and the Belle Epoque Paris to life. Information about our chapter and its leadership is available at our website, listed in the description. Thank you, and enjoy the program.
By way of introduction, I'll go ahead and present a bio about Barbara as well as about Gavin, and then I'll give a synopsis of the novel so that we're all on the same page before starting our discussion. And I think that Susan will also be posting links so you can purchase the novel if you'd like to read the whole thing. Okay, so to begin, novelist and poet Barbara Quick is best known as the author of the 2007 historical novel society favorite, Vivaldi's Virgins, a novel that has been translated into a dozen languages, made into an audiobook, and is currently in development as a mini-series. Barbara is also the winner of the Discover Great New Writers Prize for her first novel, Northern Edge, and she was awarded the 2020 Blue Light Press Poetry Prize for her debut chapbook, The Light on Sifnos. Barbara's fourth novel, What Disappears, has been over a decade in the making, which we will definitely talk about, and was launched by Regal House today, May 17th. As I said, congratulations again, Barbara.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you so much.
In addition, 5 of Barbara's poems were recorded by Garrison Keillor and featured on the Writer's Almanac last year. She has been a frequent guest on Grace Cavalieri's program from the Library of Congress, The Poet and the Poem, which has featured both her poetry and her novels. One of her poems has just been published as a full-page spread in the May 2022 issue of Scientific American, while her 2010 novel from Harper Teen, A Golden Web, continues to intrigue and attract historical fiction fans. A trained dancer and avid organic gardener, Barbara is based on a small farm and vineyard in the California wine country with her husband, Wayne Roden, who is a vigneron and a longtime violist with the San Francisco Symphony. You can learn more about Barbara at any time at barbaraquick.com. All right.
Thank you, Clara.
Yeah, thank you. And to give you some more background on Gavin, Gavin Larsen is a writer, teacher, and former professional ballet dancer. Born and raised in New York City, Gavin received her professional dance training at the School of American Ballet, the Pacific Northwest Ballet School, and the New York School of Ballet. Over the course of her 18-year professional career, she was a member of Pacific Northwest Ballet, Alberta Ballet, the Suzanne Farrell Ballet, and Oregon Ballet Theater, dancing prominent roles in ballets by George Balanchine, Jerome Robbins, Anthony Tudor, James Kudelka, Christopher Wheeldon, and Paul Taylor, as well as the major classical works and numerous original contemporary pieces. Gavin retired from full-time performing in 2010 to focus on teaching, coaching, and writing about dance, while continuing to pursue unique artistic opportunities. She has taught and coached widely across the country and even been a guest teacher for schools in Japan and Canada. In 2010, Gavin was a founding member of Incorporamento, a collaborative trio combining dance, poetry, and music, which produced several performances to critical acclaim. Gavin has been a regular contributor for Point, Dance Teacher, and Dance Spirit magazines, and her essay, Why I Dance, was published in Dance Magazine in 2009. Her writing has appeared in Dance USA's online journal, In the Green Room, in Oregon Arts Watch, The Dancing Times, and Artslandia, as well as in literary journals, including the Threepenny Review, Page and Spine, Sunlight Press, Kaiso Flash, and the Maine Review. In 2015, Gavin was honored with a fellowship to the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation in New Mexico to pursue her work as a writer. Her first book is Being a Ballerina, The Power and Perfection of the Dancing Life. She lives in Asheville, North Carolina. So you can see we're in great company with 2 writers and dancers/writers, and you'll see why that's relevant in a moment as I read you a synopsis of the novel. What Disappears is a multi-generational tale that begins in Tsarist Russia in the late 19th century and ends in Paris with the start of the First World War. One of two identical twins born to a Jewish family in dire political and financial straits, Zaneta, who you'll hear us refer to by her French name, Jeanette, throughout this program, is spirited out of an orphanage by a Catholic family from France. The other twin, Sonia, raised to believe her sister died at birth, has her life upended by the 1903 pogrom in Kishinev. The two come face to face as 29-year-old identical strangers in the doorway of Anna Pavlova's dressing room when both get jobs in Paris with Sergei Diaghilev's Ballet Russes. The resulting complicated relationship exposes their darkest secrets and dearest hopes, affecting not only their lives, but also the lives and fates of Sonia's 3 daughters. Peopled by the greatest dancers, writers, artists, designers, and trendsetters of the Belle Epoque, What Disappears explores the ways in which girls and women define their identity and search for meaning in a world that tries at every turn to hold them back. So with that said, Gavin and I will dive into questions and get this conversation rolling with Barbara, who we are so happy and honored to have here with us tonight.
I wanted to jump in and say thank you for that beautiful introduction, Clara, and offer my official congratulations, Barbara, on publication day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you and I first became acquainted about a year ago when my book was first published. It was almost exactly a year ago, and have become, I don't know, I feel like maybe we were long lost twins through the process of getting to know each other over this year as both dancers and writers. And I wanted to start by asking about the process of creating What Disappears. You mentioned a minute ago that publication day sort of feels like giving birth to a baby. And I can relate to that because I remember that feeling so well, feeling like I, spent so much time, cooking this thing, and finally it's out in the world and you just got to watch it start to learn how to walk. And so your novel, What Disappears, had quite a long pregnancy, I would say. You shared with us that it was many, many years in the making. And I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about how the project came together, an overview of how the novel came together over the years.
Absolutely. And again, Gavin, I just have to say thank you. I think we really were long lost twins in another life, in another century maybe. But and I wanted to tell everybody that I found Gavin by reading her wonderful memoir, Being a Ballerina, and I wrote to her, and then she read my book, and then suddenly it seemed like we really were destined to work creatively together. So I'm so happy this is the culmination of that first meeting today. So thank you. And yeah, this book, this novel has actually been decades and decades in the making. It's ridiculous. I began the first draft of it when I was a 21-year-old living in rural County Cork, Ireland. I identified as a poet. I had never tried to write an extended piece of prose fiction before, but I wanted to spin together some of the stories that my grandmother, my beloved maternal grandmother, Nana, had told me. She wasn't someone who talked a lot about herself or her life, but I was so curious. The little bits she told me about her life in Kishinev in Tsarist Russia, in a family of tailors, just fascinated me. And I would ask her a question, Nana, what was it like in Kishinev? And she would say, who remembers? That was how she always started, very gruffly. But little by little, I got her to tell me more details about what it was like there, what it looked like, it sounded like, it smelled like, and about the tremendous political turmoil she was growing up in at that time as part of a Jewish family. So, I just saw somebody wonderful. I just saw the writer working on the Vivaldi's Virgins miniseries, Agatha. What a joy. Hi. So anyway, I was writing and beginning these stories from Russia, stories my grandmother had told me. I got about 100 pages done. I didn't write a whole novel at all. Came back to the United States and then really began my career as a novelist. And it took me a while, but I produced three novels, and then I wanted to come back to the Ballet Russe and my grandmother's stories. Actually, I sort of discovered the Ballet Russe, and I was trying to solve a mystery from one of the stories my grandma told me, my Nana told me, about how her mother, a modest seamstress, a Jewish dressmaker, would take the train twice a year to Paris. I couldn't figure out how that could be, that she would go to the expense, that she would, be courageous enough to do this without her husband, all alone. I thought there must have been a reason, an emotional reason. What could be a big enough reason to make somebody take that kind of risk? And then it came to me, and the story of this novel came to me, connecting those original stories of my great grandmother in Kishinev and the Ballet Russe in Paris. They all came together eventually into this novel. It took me 10 years and many drafts and much help from my wonderful publisher, Janie Royal at Regal House. But I think we've done it. And I'm very excited about this story and about sharing it with the world.
That's wonderful. I think, Gavin and I were thinking it's so interesting that this is rooted in your personal history. And I love how you had to really dig to get information out of your grandmother, that it wasn't all that forthcoming. So it sounds like she might not have been your primary historical source. And of course, we'd love to ask you just about how you really dove in and looked at so many different historical periods and historical worlds, what the research process looked like, and how you discovered what it looked like, smelled like, felt like to be in those time periods, in those worlds, because you describe it so vividly in the novel.
Thank you, Clara. I did a tremendous amount of research. I did years and years everywhere I could, in libraries, on the internet, mostly people's personal memoirs from the time, contemporaneous memoirs, because I wanted to get it right. I didn't read any novels that were set in either of those times or either of those countries. I wanted primary sources that would allow me to spin my fictional world out of them so it would be accurate, even to the point of reading memoirs of people who actually lived at the time, and quotations of their wonderful conversations. And I speak several languages, so this was really an advantage, getting the advantage of knowing how some Russian would sound in French and being able to transform that into English, into that accent for, the English reading audience, but to try to preserve the authenticity of everyone's voice, whether they were a native Russian speaker or a native French speaker. So I love that they were wonderful conversationalists at that time. And the conversation was very, very rich, much more so than it is today. I wanted that to imbue the novel with that phonetic richness. So I looked in every archive. I spun stories from everything I could find. And I did a whole article actually about how I did the research. It was published in Dance International magazine. There must have been, 100 volumes that I used for my research. I got a lot of them around the house now, and just did what I could to make it as authentic as I could, and to check and check and check and check. So.
Wow, it really paid off. Your research really paid off, because one thing I find so impressive about historical novelists is the ability to keep track of all of that factual information and at the same time be completely creative about it. And so you're being both a scientist and a sociologist at the exact same time and weaving them together. And that's what makes historical novels so, I mean, to me, so captivating and like just so engrossing. Something I read recently, actually, in the New Yorker was that historians tell us what happened and novelists tell us what it felt like. And then historical novelists do both. And that would be you.
I read that article too. I absolutely love that quote, and I'm so glad you recalled it for us, Gavin. It was, it's so true. But we all bring our special knowledge to what we write. I mean, reading your memoir, being a ballerina, it was so rich because you brought the entire physical and spiritual experience of dance, the bodily experience, to your words. And it's just, it actually was so enriching for me and so validating for me. I read your memoirs, after I wrote my book, and then I was able to apply to you for some help. And there was just one particular dance move I was having trouble getting just right, and you helped me with that. It was wonderful. But yeah, we are trying to bring everything to the writing. Everything goes into that soup that we're making, every single thing, including all our personal stories, all our joys and fears and psychic pain. It's a little distressing in a way when it's published and you realize, oh my God, everyone is going to read that now. I just, exposed my inner guts, and everybody's going to be looking. It's really something. It's a bit scary. I mean, sometimes it makes me want to run and put my head under a pillow or something and not come out. It's a bit scary, and it's very intimate. It's a sort of intimacy you're sharing with strangers.
That ties right into another thing we really want to talk to you about, is that blurred line between memoir and fiction. And you're a novelist and I'm a memoirist, but I felt like, I wrote a lot of my book in a different person's voice because I was trying to both shield myself and be completely free. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about those blurred lines between memoir and fiction, because I think, in any memoir, there is maybe a fictionalized aspect to it somehow. And certainly in fiction, there's so much of yourself in it.
There is so much of myself in it, but it's all it's all sublimated in the fictional characters' lives, which I have tried to embody. I mean, it's a sort of it requires a sort of controlled schizophrenia, I think, where I actually hear the other characters' voices and write down what they're saying. I know it sounds completely mad, but this was the case too, especially with Vivaldi's Virgins, and it was very much the case with this book that I became Nijinsky, I became Diaghilev, I became that cad Paul Poiret, and I became my fictional characters. And their longing, Sonia's longing to find her twin was in fact my longing to be reunited with my estranged sister. I mean, that was the most personal, undisguised part of it. But my story was completely sublimated in the story of these twins. So you'd have to, I mean, I'm giving away the game here, that it really was part of my own psychic world there. But, and certainly memories of childbirth, of giving birth. I mean, everything I experienced, I put in there, to the smell of my grandmother's pickles and sauerkraut, fermenting around the house, to my Aunt Tilly's rugula that she baked. Everything, all those sense memories went into the novel, all of it. So, I'm pretty old, and I've acquired a lot of sense memories. So it's a rich soup at this point. I think being a novelist, unlike being a dancer, I mean, it's really tough. Dancers have a really shorter life on the stage. I think novelists can write as long as their mental faculties are working. So I feel like I'm writing better now and more truthfully than I've ever written before. So that's really wonderful. And I don't know whether I've actually answered your question, Gavin.
That's okay. I mean, it wasn't a specific question. It was more of like I want to hear your thoughts on it. But yeah, no, that's a beautifully expressed.
Thank you.
And Barbara, we had also wanted to ask you, I mean, it kind of came into my mind, you know, there's these characters, so many of them are so distinct and they're so different throughout the novel. So I was thinking there must be characters you really relate to and you put a lot of yourself into, and then others who maybe you don't relate to as much or at all. It sounds like from hearing you talk, there might be pieces of each character that you relate to. But how do you craft characters and sort of choose which qualities to imbue in them and how to create their personalities, and how do you maybe dig inside yourself, even for some of the characters like Paul Poiret, who it might be hard for us to see you relating to in any way.
That's really funny because, well, I once took a screenwriting workshop with Robert McKee. And one of the things that he said that really stuck with me was, you've got to love your villains. And it's really true. I actually love writing about the bitches and the bad guys more than anything else. It's just so rich and so liberating in a way, because, you know, we all want to be nice people in our lives, to be loving and kind and compassionate. And but when you get to write from inside the head of somebody who's really a narcissistic cad, you know, and nuanced and complex, it's very freeing. I think that I went into writing fiction because I'm just greedy. I'm greedy for life. I wanted to experience more than just my little finite life. When you write fiction, you get to live lots of lives, an infinite number of lives, really. And you want to, I mean, the thing about historical fiction, sometimes characters aren't as fully dimensional as one would like them to be. I want to write characters that are all fully dimensional, and I want to structure my prose like poetry, where each word gets weighed carefully, put on the scale before it's put into that soup, to make sure it's the right word and it's the right music, and people are speaking with their own authentic voice. That's not some disguised version of my voice. It's their voice. They're real. I feel like they exist. And I realize when I talk about my characters in my story, it sounds like I'm talking about people I know and that I've lived with. And I guess because when you write a story like this, you do live with the characters. They inhabit you and they haunt you. And I would wake up in the morning hearing a bit of dialogue, and I would grab my notebook and write it down. And I was off to the races after that.
Wow, that's fascinating. The process of embodying each character, even the villain, as you write and craft them.
It's a little bit crazy. I realize, you know, I mean, I'm obviously, I'm not schizophrenic. I don't think I have any diagnosis, but other than being a Gemini, maybe. But it requires an extreme form of empathy that goes across time. It's not centered in one time period. You have to open all your senses to everything, and it's actually it's painful. It hurts like hell sometimes. It really hurts to write, and it hurts to expose your sensibilities so much to the elements, in a way, to the world. But it also feels like, well, this is my work. This is the work I do, and I feel honored that I get to do it.
Wow.
I think I'd love to hear you talk about your relationship with ballet. Selfishly, I want to hear you talk about your relationship with ballet because that's, my primary, frame of reference too. But something I have not asked you about, even though we've talked so much about your book, is why you chose ballet and high fashion as these two art forms. And the more I read and the more I thought about it, I see so many parallels between those two arts in the sense of costuming on stage or on a runway, and the creation of shields that can also be seen as revelations. And would you just tell us a little bit about your history with ballet and how you felt experiencing it, writing about it versus performing it yourself differed?
Well, I've got to say right off the bat that I have never been a ballerina. I've always been a devotee of dancing. I love dancing. It gives me relief from being in my overpacked head. And I love learning choreography. I love performing. I love all of it. I love being with a group and performing, but mostly I do. These days I've been doing Brazilian dancing mostly. When I was a little girl, tiny little girl, I had, my pretty little tutu that I just loved. And I took ballet along with the other little girls, and, where they would do splits and, they'd be touching the ground. I would be 1 foot off the ground at least. I never had any turnout. And I realized that I was doomed never to be good at ballet. And it was frustrating to me. So in a way, I guess this is sort of, it was wish fulfillment to get to write about ballet. Somebody I knew in the academic world had shown me her archive of first edition books about the Ballet Russe, and I was just fascinated by the way all these artists from all these different art forms had come together to create these epic performances, which really changed Western culture in the Belle Epoque in Paris. And I loved it. I loved the theatricality of it. I loved the costumes, the color, the art, the sets, the drama. And I studied a lot of theater when I was a kid, mostly as an escape from my own family. But I had a huge amount of theater training as a kid in Los Angeles, very, very good training from wonderful professionals. And I went to school with kids who were already working professionally in theater. I realized that I was never going to make it as an actress. I didn't have the voice for the stage, and I didn't have the looks for film. And so I thought, well, what can I do? I can dance, but I'm sorry, I can write. That's a funny slip. I couldn't dance. I was never a great dancer. I never was, but I'm just so enthusiastic about it. And I admire so much the dancers such as yourself. And Clara too has a tremendous background in ballet. It's such a beautiful thing. It's such a beautiful discipline. And I just, for the life of me, couldn't make my body do that. So I wrote a lot in my novel about my character, Jeanette, as a child, when she first comes to ballet at the age of 8, struggling to make her body do it. And, I had some little parallels in the world of Brazilian dance, where I remember when I first started, standing in front of a mirror saying, okay, shoulders, shake, 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 I didn't know how to do it. It was like trying to wiggle your ears if you couldn't, trying to get that kind of control. But in a funny way, I guess what I've done is to do all of it through writing fiction. And that is as close as I've been able to get to your very beautiful world. I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, you sure succeeded. Yeah. Go ahead, Claire.
Definitely. I was going to say, on kind of the flip side of that same coin, I was curious, how did your experience, or how has your experience with ballet, since you have actually taken ballet classes, it sounds like quite a bit, and other forms of dance, how do you think that informed the way you portrayed dance and the way you portrayed Jeanette's experience in the novel, more than just researching it or watching it might have? Because it seems like you have a different understanding, maybe a deeper understanding from doing and attempting the art form that probably translated into the book in some ways.
Well, I'm an imposter. I mean, I really, I took ballet as a kid. I took jazz from, a teacher who came from a ballet background. I took modern from a teacher who came from a ballet background, but I've never really been a ballerina. I mean, I know the vocabulary, the basic vocabulary, but I really learned by diving deep into ballet memoirs, some very old, some newer, listening to interviews with ballet dancers, male and female, reading the amazing memoirs of Václav Nijinsky, Tamara Karsavina, just reading, absorbing, watching a lot of ballet, a lot of archival footage on the internet. It's amazing what you can find on these Russian sites, just incredible coverage, really old stuff where you think that exists, that's amazing. And feeling it that way, feeling through perceiving. So yes, I think I've identified bodily so strongly during some of the research. I remember watching, I can't remember who the dancer was. It was an amazing male dancer who was doing something. I was watching a performance and I got a very severe cramp in my leg watching him do something which I knew I would not be able to do, but my body, unbeknownst to me, was actually trying to do it. And I got this terrible cramp. I had to, I was in screaming pain for a few minutes just from the imagining of it. So yeah, I'm a would-be. I would love to have been a ballet dancer. And one of the greatest compliments I ever got I was in a yoga class and somebody said to me, "Oh, I can tell just from looking at your back that you were a professional dancer." And I was like, okay, I must be working those muscles while I'm writing.
Yeah. Well, this is just an observation, but it sounds like you really have the perfect balance, especially for that character, since Jeanette, she feels a bit that she's over the hill at this time and she hasn't gotten as far as she wanted to in the art form, and perhaps feels a bit like an imposter herself at times. And at the same time, it sounds like you, by taking ballet, did actually capture what I've noticed is the universal experience. I've always been surprised that people at every ability level in the art form seem to enjoy it equally. And I think it is exactly what you said before, that kind of getting into a different mental headspace, turning off all the other thoughts and focusing really hard on what you're doing with your body. So I would say that you do have the experience, and also clearly did deep research that really informed how you described dancing and ballet so vividly.
Thank you. Well, and dance, still taking dance classes is really important to my own psychic health. I need to take dance classes. I love it for the community, and I love it for just the relief, from being myself. I was actually wondering if you might like to have me read a little scene from the novel.
That would be wonderful. I think this is a good time for an excerpt.
So just to set the scene, this takes place in the forest of Fontainebleau in Paris in the fall. The leaves are all yellow and gorgeous, mounded up in great piles all over the park. And a carriage has just arrived. And this is from the point of view of our dancer, Jeanette. She's still very young. When she woke, the light was magically perfect outside the carriage windows. Paul gave the driver some money to take himself out for a rest and a meal, while Jeanette hastened to clean herself up. She was still only half dressed when Paul, after unloading his painting things, extended his hand to her. Looking around first to make sure they were alone, she leapt barefoot out of the carriage and did a series of passé turns on the leafy ground, ending in an arabesque allongé. Paul, who was setting up his easel, shouted, "Brava! I must paint you in that last pose. Only if you have fairies who can hold my leg in the air." Jeanette rubbed at a spot on her foot where a twig had poked her. "Oh, Paul, don't you understand the slightest thing about how the body works?" "How the body works is your art form, chérie. Mine is knowing how it looks." He took off the rest of her clothes, and then one costume at a time, mostly just draped over her and pinned, he posed her and painted what he saw. "I hereby declare war on the corset," he said, as he put the finishing touches on one of his watercolor sketches. "No longer will the female body be entombed and distorted, divided into two badly fitted pieces by the wretched things. These designs are much better without." She walked behind the easel to inspect his paintings, admiring how chic she looked in them, herself, and yet not herself. She'd never seen any clothes like these before. Paul stood before his drawings with his head cocked first to one side, then the other. "Yes, yes, they're brilliant. If I were designing the world, every female would have the body of a ballerina. What a good muse you are, my dear. When I am done forming you, there will be nothing left of Jeanette Dupré, minor dancer for the Paris Opera Ballet." Why did he always have to remind her of her own unimportance in the world while puffing himself up so constantly? "What shall I be then?" "Why, people will look at you and remark, 'There goes Paul Poiret's mannequin.'" Jeanette didn't think she wanted to be anyone's mannequin, not even Paul's, not if it meant the obliteration of all she'd worked so hard to achieve, all she'd sacrificed to become a dancer. She knew there were countless aspiring ballerinas who would tear her eyes out for the chance to steal her place in the company. After all these years, Paul still had no idea about who she really was.
Thank you, Barbara. That's such a powerful excerpt of the novel. I think it demonstrates so many of the themes and many of the topics we wanted to dive into. So if we could turn our attention for a moment to Paul, this character of Paul Poiret, let's talk about him. He's complicated. He treats both twins pretty terribly, not only from what we heard, where maybe he doesn't quite realize this, but he doesn't seem to recognize women as fully formed humans. And he kind of objectifies everyone for his own end, but he seduces both twins at the same time for years and hides them from one another, even knowing that Sonia is desperately seeking her twin. So he is often a villain. And yet I feel that in the novel, we also glimpse certain actions and thought processes that maybe make him a bit more complicated. So there's a lot to unpack here and many questions we can ask, but maybe to start with, is Paul a monster? Is he a villain? Where does he land?
I think that there are probably very few monsters in the world. Paul is an egotistical, narcissistic, brilliant genius of fashion design, a brilliant artist, a brilliant innovator, he existed, just to say that. Paul Poiret was known as the king of fashion during the Belle Epoque. Everyone who was anyone, who wanted to look good and make a good impression in society would go to him for his designs, to get a design made for her by Paul Poiret. And he was a despot. He made people beg. And yet, as head of this fashion empire. He was quite an innovator in that, he gave people free meals on the premises. He would feed his workers beautiful meals. He hired 3 cooks at one time to make beautiful meals for his employees. At one point, he enlisted a whole crew of 12-year-old working class Parisian girls, and he enlisted them in a group he called the Martins after one of his daughters. And he let them create art, and he created an interior decoration empire, very innovative for the time. I mean, it gave these young girls a chance to absolutely excel and rise above any possibilities that they would have ever had without him. And yet he was he justified everything that he did in the name of inspiring himself. So he was like many people, unfortunately, that we've seen in our own time, and actually, throughout history, there have been powerful, artistic, brilliant, narcissistic men like this who just felt that anything was fair game for their art. But I think anyone in the arts, especially writers, have to question, is this okay that I'm doing this? Is this okay that I'm, writing poetry that is exposing some of my own family members' secrets? Is it all right that I'm being so open about things that are maybe so private, maybe should be private? Am I using people I've known and loved, writing, stealing certain things from their lives, from what I've learned about their lives? How do we justify what we do for art? And someone like Paul Poiret, he just didn't draw the line anywhere. He felt that he could rightfully do anything because his art was of such great importance to the world. So, in a way, it must be great to feel like that. I think, especially as women, we tend not to feel like that. We question, we're trying to take care of other people. And it's much more of a moral dilemma for us than for men like Paul Poiret or Jeffrey Epstein. Some people who really do seem like monsters. And yet, I think with any of these stories, if you dig down deeply enough, they're not just monsters. They're people who are trying to figure out how to be themselves in the world and trying to create as well as they can in the world. And it's tough. It's hard for all of us. I think it's something we have to ask ourselves every day, almost every moment. Is this how I want to be? Is this what I want to do? Is this how I want to do it? Am I being thoughtful enough? Am I giving enough love here?
It sounds like you're being much more thoughtful than Paul Poiret was.
Well, I certainly wouldn't do what he did, but it was sure fun writing about what I had him doing. Now, the historical Paul Poiret, he was clearly a womanizer. He was clearly someone who he became tremendously wealthy and then lost all his wealth. And there was no limit. He put no limits on himself whatsoever. He sort of saw himself as a sort of god, and crowned himself the king of fashion. And he did marvelous things. He changed culture. And yet I'm sure he hurt a lot of people, including his own family, who, he loved. He did love them, but I'm sure he hurt them too with the way he lived.
Do you think that it's okay to excuse our geniuses for such things?
It's such a hard one. I think we have to just always try to be clear and questioning and honest with ourselves as we do what we do. I think, if every poet, every screenwriter, every novelist asked, am I hurting anyone when I'm doing this? Am I doing more good than bad? We want to try. After all, the excuse of art is catharsis for other people. And I know as a dancer too, that's what you want to give. You want to create moments that will open people's hearts, will move them, will make them think about the most important things in their lives in that moment of witnessing the dance or reading the novel, reading the memoir. It's all about connecting emotionally with people's most authentic experiences. It's what we want when we listen to music, whatever the form of music is that we love. I listened to Brahms' Second Symphony a lot while writing this novel. I probably know the whole symphony by heart. If only I could play any instrument other than a fountain pen, I could play that Second Symphony. I tried to play it in this novel. Because I love the moments of joy, the tenderness, the sorrow, the aspiration, the hope that beautiful music gives. It's what I aspire to do as a writer. It's what I would love to be able to do. Again, I feel like I've wandered way off base.
No, not at all. One thing we have been discussing with you and thinking about when reading the novel is just how timeless and universal some of these themes feel, and if not hopefully necessarily timeless, how relevant to the modern day. And we see a lot of these kind of feminist principles playing out, or what we would now define as feminist principles playing out on a debate stage and in public discussion in a way that presumably wasn't happening back then. So while we still face a lot of the same issues, I think time will tell whether we see that really change, or whether some of these themes that come up with a discussion of someone like Paul Poiret, and whether geniuses and artists are ultimately excused, if those continue to linger and if they are timeless topics.
Yeah, I think if you scratch the surface of any genius through the ages, you're going to find some unattractive human qualities in them. If they all had to pass the test of being just fabulous people and good fathers and husbands and whatever, I don't think we'd have anything in our museums. They would be empty. It's tough. And I think that's why I think that the questioning we're doing now is very important. But I also think that the art itself, it's something very special and beautiful, and real art lasts way beyond the people who made it. So yeah, you've got to say, I've got to say that the art is the important thing. The artist is just the person who's bringing the work to the world. The artist is a kind of, a vessel, a receptor, an antenna. And then there's the art. My little life doesn't matter. It matters to my son, it matters to my husband, it matters to my friends. But in terms of what's important, you just do your best work. And I guess I'd have to say the thing I am actually proudest of giving to the world is my son. So, it's a balance. It's a balancing act between creating what you can create in every way, from your body, from your mind, from your thoughts, from your pain, from your joys. And it's a kind of a religious discipline in a way.
Wow. That
I'd love to
definitely
see if
sounds
we can
timeless.
have, if there's a couple more questions from Gavin and Clara to Barbara. We've got a nice queue of questions to ask. But Gavin and Clara, if you had a couple other points you wanted to bring up before we switched over to the question and answer, maybe you would present those now.
Yeah, great. Gavin, do you think we could do one more emotional deep dive and then one of our wrap-up questions?
Yeah, let's. I mean, this might, I hope this doesn't take us down a rabbit hole, but Barbara, the parallels between writing and dancing, I just can't get away from that, because they're writing and performing, and writing and ballet particularly, I just cannot get myself to stop obsessing over those, because they're so strong. And you are such a writer and such a dancer in spirit and soul. And in your book, you weave together, as we just talked about, ballet, dance, and fashion. And at one point later on in the novel, there's a scene, you're describing a performance, and all of a sudden it just hit me over the head that, the concept of identity as a performer, putting on a costume, it's both a shield and a tool of revelation in terms of expression and hiding oneself, feeling brave on stage or on the page. And you do that so beautifully in this book. Was that conscious in your mind as you were writing? Did you see and just, determinedly elevate those parallels between performance and identity?
And nothing happened that consciously, Gavin. In a way, I feel like maybe the best way I could answer that, I don't know, could I read another little excerpt, which sort of, I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So much that Jeanette could do with ease before is hard now. At 29, she already feels old. She knows her jumps aren't as high. Her heart sometimes pounds so audibly that she dreads the places in the score when the orchestra plays pianissimo. Every night at home, after rehearsing for hours and hours, she plunges her feet, bruised and aching, into a bucket full of ice. She spends far too much of her pay on ice. Just the night before, she was woken out of a dead sleep by a pain in her left knee so intense that it kept her awake, worrying. Is it over? Am I through? She is nearly used up as a dancer, alone in the world, without a pension, without a husband. She could have had a husband if she hadn't continued with such naivete to believe that Paul Poiret would eventually marry her, that it was Jeanette, and Jeanette alone he really loved. She finishes her hasty warm-up with a reverence, catching a last glimpse of herself in the mirror, realizing with horror that she forgot to put on her wreath of pink silk roses. Pinning it as she scurries down the metal staircase, taking the last 2 steps, 2 at a time. She tries to seem invisible as she bolts past the regisseur, who is standing with his clipboard in the wings. He narrows his eyes at her and growls, 10 francs, Dupré. And her rent is due. The prelude is at the second to last bar. All the other dancers are poised and ready in the twilight on stage when Jeanette runs on, lowering herself down as noiselessly as possible among the other members of the corps and the demi-soloist, all of them reclining at Nijinsky's feet, with Anna Pavlova posed adoringly on one side of him and Tamara Karsaviana on the other. Someone whispers something nasty sounding in Russian. Jeanette tries to slow her breathing in the 4 seconds left to her before the nocturne starts and the curtain rises.
Barbara, I just have to say that is so relatable. It is just, I mean, it blows my mind that you never danced professionally as a ballet dancer. Your research was more than just research. I mean, you captured it. And, you did ask me to read your book initially, and you said, look for some factual, technical things. And I was looking and looking and looking and looking, and there's nothing. And all I could think of was, this is so real. The timelessness and the just, yeah, the timelessness of the dancer's experience is right there. And any dancer who's reading that novel today would, there are a few, obviously like differences in terms of era, and there, we don't get fined for being late to the stage anymore, but, you spend too much of your money, maybe not on ice bags because you have it from the ice machine, but too much of your money on physical therapy and on, ace bandages and kinesio tape. But it's timeless. So thank you for preserving that.
Well, thank you, Gavin, because that is the ultimate validation for me. And the quote you gave me for this book was the ultimate validation for me. And I really think it must have, I don't know, maybe we're both time travelers, and I don't know, maybe we were sisters in another life. I don't know, but the ballet, the pain, the ballet glory was there. It's kind of shimmering in the ether, and I just had my butterfly net, and I'm glad I caught it, to your mind. That's such a wonderful thing. I'm honored.
You did.
Susan, do you want us to pose another question or two, or should we turn it over to audience questions?
Well, let's get started on these questions because some really good ones here. I'm going to start with Megori's first question. He wanted to know, or she wanted to know, with Russian characters, Barbara, how do you inhabit their accents or manner of speaking? Did you mention that you spoke both Russian and French?
I don't speak Russian, but I do have some wonderful Russian friends, and I heard a lot of Russian as a child. My grandmother spoke Russian, and some of her friends spoke Russian, so it was in my ears. But I certainly have noticed with my Russian-born friends, even now, that certain little peculiarities of speech, like leaving out the article, and I try to recreate this. And I have a scene that takes place at the orphanage when the twins are still first adopted. And I was speaking in the voice of the matron's assistant, Golda, and she's talking to this French couple who have come to adopt a baby girl. And she says, "Oh, that is just Sonia and Zanetta always making jokes together. Special case. I can show you youngest orphans in day room now. Very nice girls. I cannot authorize, but you can look. This way, please." And so that sort of thing. I mean, I guess I imagined my native Russian speaking friends as they would be speaking. And in this case, speaking French, and in my case, speaking English. But yeah, I think I do speak about 5 languages. I mean, the only one I speak really well is French, but I speak some others pretty well. And I think it's because I have a good musical ear. I think the secret for learning languages is hearing the music of the languages, and then being a kind of actor, and not just saying the words and pronouncing them, but you sing them. Every different language has its music. So it was like learning, it still is like learning music. My goal is to know 11 languages before I die, to learn that music. So I hope that answered your question, and thank you for asking it.
And Janie Royal wanted to know, I would love to hear about your vision for Sonia's daughters. They were so vibrantly depicted in this novel, and they were living in Paris on the cusp of such changes. Do you see another novel in the works depicting the progress of their lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Janie is my publisher for this novel. And believe me, they haunt me still, especially Olga, who is the character in whom I'm most invested. I mean, Olga is she's a precocious feminist and social activist, and has a tremendous social conscience. And part of me feels that Olga probably went on after the First World War to volunteer in Spain during the Civil War there. And I don't know. I'm kind of getting shivers as I say this, but maybe that's where the story goes. And stays in touch with her sister, the one who becomes a ballet dancer herself, and the other who has her own little fashion empire that she starts, and how they grow together and grow apart, and how Sonia, how Olga embodies her social conscience. I'm not sure yet. The crystal ball is dark, but maybe I have a funny feeling about books with sequels, but there are some great ones. So the short answer is, I don't know, maybe. I'll keep listening. Stay tuned.
Excellent. Roger asked, Barbara, at Fairfield University in Fairfield, Connecticut, the Center for Theatrical Energy is the Quick Theater. He wondered if there was any connection.
Oh, I wish. I'll come and give a presentation. How about that? I don't think there is a connection. Quick was a married name, and it is my son's last name, and it was the name I used to when I first started publishing in the New York Times Book Review. So I really needed to keep that name, but I wasn't born with it. So no connection, but that sounds like a nice place. I'd love to visit. Just send me an invitation.
Excellent. Judith Lindbergh asks, isn't it a reflection of the time that women were perceived as muses rather than being whole creative forces, creative beings themselves?
Absolutely, it was. And it has, been, as you know, Judy, throughout history. It's that's what women were seen as these, from the first Bible stories, they were just accessories, basically, for men and for men's work. And it's kind of shocking the extent to which this hasn't changed. It is changing. We want it to change more, but there's still a lot of that left. And I think it takes civilizations a long time to change, to evolve, to improve, and to be able to see themselves. And that's one of the fascinating things. You've written about very early prehistory, Judy, and Judith Lindbergh, written wonderfully. And yes, we see how that began, and it's, what enormous earthquakes had to happen for women to emerge from that crevice in which they've been put by history. And that's why it's so exciting to find someone like Anna Maria dal Violin from Vivaldi's Virgins, and bring this woman who really existed to really make her life three-dimensional again, so we can hear it and enjoy it. And Agatha, we've got to do this. We've got to have this mini series happen. I'm so excited about it, to see this character rescued from the dustbin of history and to let her live again in all her musical glory. That would be such a privilege to help make that happen.
And Barbara, here's another question about the plot that you had using twins, how refreshing it is that it's female twins during this period of time, because so often it was male twins. Are there twins in your family, and how did you research them?
Well, there aren't twins in my family of origin. There are twins in my husband's family, twin sisters, and I've been very interested in that phenomenon. And as I said, I'm a Gemini, so I'm a kind of a natural twin, I guess, even though I don't really believe in astrology. But I was fascinated by a nonfiction book I found called Identical Strangers, which was very informative for me in terms of talking about these two identical twins who had been put in a Jewish orphanage, actually, in New York, much later than the time period of my novel, and separated, adopted separately. And it was part of a really kind of a heartless scientific experiment to see what would happen. And then they met again as adults, as identical strangers. So that whole idea was so fascinating to me, and gave me the idea of using this for my novel. to see how it would feel. And also, I'm not a twin, but I do have a sister, and I felt like sort of an only child because I'm so far apart in age from both my older brother and my younger sister. And I was fascinated by the idea of, if two twins were separated and one really longed to find the other, but one didn't even know about the other and then found out about her, would she welcome this information? Would this be a wonderful thing to find out about? There's someone who looks just like me taking up space in the world. I think it could be really horrifying. And how horrifying to long for someone's love, long to find them, and they do not love you in return. In fact, they find you repulsive. They don't want to have anything to do with you. They want you dead in a way. So for me, feeling very rejected by my sister, and I don't know, I felt very rejected by my mother. It was a very personal thing to explore, and I got to explore it very thoroughly in this novel.
And is that a reflection of what the title of your book is, Barbara?
Yes, thank you, Susan. That's very perceptive of you. Yes, what disappears, but it is also what disappears as the world goes through its tremendous tumultuous changes. And, the whole Russian Empire disappeared during the course of my novel. Huge change, a whole civilization that had lasted for a very long time. What disappears when people are killed, people you love are killed in a hate crime. I mean, it's so sad that the pogrom I describe in the novel, the 1903 pogrom in Kishinev, when so many, good, innocent people were just murdered from ethnic hatred. It's still happening. It's happening right now in our country. It's happening here. It's so horrifying. And in the novel, I wrote about the plague of 1889, and not the plague, the pandemic. I wrote about it before our own pandemic entered the world, our contemporary world. And yet there it was, I had written about it and it happened. I'm not saying I caused it or anything. I'm just saying that I think as writers, we envision things and maybe resurrect things that are happening across time. And the writer sometimes plugs into a kind of timelessness. And what disappears is what will continue to disappear, what has always disappeared. And that is our own mortal selves. It's all ephemeral. It's like dance. It disappears. Our lives are ephemeral. We live for a moment. We're all these butterflies, we're blossoms, and then we're gone. And all we can do is just witness and appreciate, worship in a way, worship all this, the beauty and the richness of being alive in this life.
Well, I think you certainly captured the title of this presentation just now, since it's called Capturing the Ephemeral. Barbara, we really want to thank you, and Gavin Larsen and Clara Peterson.
And that concludes our program. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. You can find out more about the New York City chapter of the Historical Novel Society and our leadership at our website, or contact us at hns-nyc@mail.com. And finally, please consider supporting our volunteer panelists and hosts. You can contact them at their websites below. Thanks for joining us.